Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second panel, Future Models of Mobility and Innovation in Motion. My name is Pranav Thole, and I'm a second-year urban design student at the GSD. I'm excited to moderate this panel today, which will discuss the exciting advancements in the mobility sector and its implications on our cities. I stumbled upon the Grand Paris project in 2019 when, like every other tourist, I went to visit the Palace of Versailles, and I happened to see this project in an exhibition outside. The ambition and the scale of the project left a lasting impression on me, and I was curious to see where this project goes from there. And I'm honored to have the opportunity to explore its potential impact on the future of mobility in the panel today. Before we begin, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Dean Sarah Whiting, Professor Joan Busquets, and Megan for their efforts in organizing this exhibition and also the workshops. I would also like to thank the members of the society for traveling all the way and engaging with the community here at the school. For the panel today, we have with us Antoine Picon, Carole Voulgaris, David Zipper, and Pierre-Alain, whom you heard from in the last discussion, so I will skip his bio. I will keep the introductions short so we can I'll keep the introductions short so we can move on to the discussion quickly. Antoine is the G. Ware Travelstead Professor of the History of Architecture and Technology at the GSD. With a background in engineering, architecture, and history, he has dedicated his research to the history of architecture and urban technologies. His recent work provides a comprehensive analysis of how the digital culture has transformed architecture and urban environment. His expertise also extends to the topic of smart cities, and he's currently exploring the relationship between urban nature, technology, and politics in a future publication. Our next panelist is David Zipper. David is a visiting fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Taubman Center for State and Local Government, where he analyzes the relationship between transportation policy and technology. He brings a unique perspective to the panel of having worked within the City Hall and serving as a venture capitalist. He has written extensively on topics on transportation, ranging from transportation data use, micromobility, and connections between public transit, city regulations, and private shared vehicles. Our next panelist is Dr. Carole Voulgaris. Carole is an assistant professor of transportation planning in the UPD Department of Urban Planning and Design at the GSD. Her research focuses on the ways that transportation agencies and individual travelers use data to inform decision-making. And she has published over 20 journal articles on related topics. She is also on the leadership board of the Transit Data Committee of the National Academy's Transportation Research Board. To kick off our panel, we have with us Veronica Cathelain. I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong. I promise I practiced a few times. Director and Chief Engineer of the Grand Paris Society, who will make a short opening remark. With over 2 decades of experience steering development projects that have a strong technological dimension, Veronica specializes in designing and managing projects related to engineering, transportation, industry, and environmental policies. Notably, he has also led the planning and development of Paris airports. With this, I would like to welcome him to give us a short presentation, and we move on to the panel.
Thank you very much. My name is really Bernard Cathelain, so congratulations. Well, I would like to announce how this project, the Grand Paris Express, was designed and created, because I think it's a real innovation. To start with, we had a huge debate with all the communities, with population, with association, to decide what will be the layout of the lines, what will be the implementation, and even the number of the stations. After this huge debate, with hundreds of public meetings, the project was, we could say, sanctified by the law. But it was just the beginning, because we decided to go on with this, and once the stations were located, the precise design of the stations, the way they are connected to the city, the way the evacuation wheels are implemented inside the city, everything in the project was discussed with our stakeholders. So this is a continuous process of discussion with people in order to co-create the Grand Paris Express. And this is, I think, the core innovation of our project. And then we decided that innovation should be implemented at every stage of our project. We decided to have innovation as a criteria inside our purchasement process. We decided to have incentive inside a contract to have our contractors proposing some innovation, some experiment while they are doing the works. We have launched many calls for project, and with this project we wanted to have some innovations, not only for the works, for instance, innovation, low carbon concrete, or innovation, or to deal with the spoil we have, which is a huge something very difficult to deal with, but also innovation in urban planning. We had experiment on urban planning with such experiment. So we did that because we thought innovation was really important, and we had two reasons for that. The first reason was that we thought it was somehow our duty. Such a huge project is, we think, a fantastic opportunity to implement innovation and maybe have this innovation reproduced in other works. So it was really important, because this project is huge, because it's unprecedented, to have innovation and to use this project to have innovation in construction, in design, and so on. And I think the second reason is most important. When we launched this project, we were in 2010, and the first line will be open in 2025. And the complete system will be operating in 2030. So it could, you could think it's quite short, and we sometimes think it's quite short to create such a project. But it's also a long period of time to imagine what would be the expectation of people using the transport system, the expectation of people living around the stations. And we think that innovation is a way to be up to date when the transport will be operating, but also a way to have this project open to innovation and evolutive. We think that this is a way to have a resilient, I think Dominique Perrault here will speak much more better than me about resilience, but resilience in our project is also a way to connect people together and to give them opportunities to face difficulties they have, because they have new possibilities of connection, but also possibility to use this transport system with new ways. We don't know what would be the expectation in 15 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, and to have station able to evolve in the time is very important, I think. And this is also what we decided to have through innovation in our project. Now we have many tunnels which are dug now. We have some stations which are emerging. We have, of course, everything settled to design the places, to design the stations. But many things in our project are still to be designed. And we think this is really important, because it's a way to learn of what we are doing and to improve what we are doing. Sometimes we make mistakes, and it's a way to go forward over these mistakes, and to have something that it can be used by every talent who are working on this project. So it's the reason why I think innovation and evolution is the core system inside Grand Paris Express. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you to the panelists once again for joining us this afternoon. As we navigate the ever-evolving transportation landscape, it's important to recognize that it's not only about finding new technological solutions to move from point A to point B, but also rethinking the structural models governing our transportation systems. In this context, the Grand Paris project stands out as a transportation network or as a transportation necklace, as Dean Whiting suggested last night, instead of a flow-based movement logic. To start us off, I would like Antoine and Pierre to reflect on this. In what ways do you think the Grand Paris project, which is a network of infrastructures, represents the future of mobility? What stood out for you, and what are you really skeptical about?
Okay, I think a good conference is where everybody repeats what was said before. So I would like to start by politics and governance. I think one of the important aspects of this project, this is not, as Peter reminded us, the largest mass transit project in the world, but probably one in which the politics was among the most complex. And I think to be able to coordinate, the political will of various communities, etc., is certainly one of the important aspects. The other thing I would retain is a certain degree of openness, which really struck me also. This is, a couple of circles. I don't know whether it's one or two circles. Looks like the start of the 5 Olympic rings. Anyway, I think the idea that it's not a network which is finished once and for all, but which is actually something that will evolve, I think it's really important. I think above all, we are getting out of the kind of closed circuit vision of the network and going towards something more open, something plugged into other resources. I think I've heard a lot that intermodality is part of the scheme, and I think this is important. This is not only a couple of rings or one ring, it's actually something that distributes and allows for intermodality. So I think that's really the other point I would retain at this stage. And also, I have to say, also a certain social generosity by the end, which is also what makes great project. And really, so that would be in those sense that I would say that it is innovative. Of course, I'm biased, as you may imagine. And I'm short.
Well, the question is about what are maybe the unthought parts of a project like this, or what could be the side effects that we've not addressed yet. So maybe to come back to Peter Rowe's warning, I think that the Grand Paris Express is about a very large part of the metropolis, but not the whole part. And I think that there's a great work to do, which is not the responsibility of Société du Grand Paris, but maybe it will be, or it can become a political issue, that in every transportation project like this, there is sprawl linked to it. Like when you think about a part of the city, the side effect is sprawl. From what I know, maybe we can discuss that, and maybe...
Sprawl is not bad.
No, sprawl is not bad at all.
Especially French sprawl.
So we can discuss the kind of sprawl. So I guess one of the questions is how to have a very small scale and a very precise look at all the small network that is going to be linked. It's a bit what Antoine just said also. All the other tools of transportation that needs to be linked to that. And all the other layers and all the kind of very small wheels, that we have in the cities. We have big wheels and small wheels and very different kind of speeds. And everything that can bring to the stations, and also everything that make the whole metropolis and megalopolis work together. I think that's one of the issues. And maybe the second one, but it's part of the question of the social justice and and the overall aspect of the project that is linked to the inhabitants and to the populations that are here is also how in the long term, and I have no answer to that, but how climate is going to change the issue. And I think we don't have any capacity to know very closely or with certainty how it's going to happen in the future. But the idea that in Paris you won't see the level of the sea go up, so maybe it's difficult to know that the risk is here, but you know that in 2030 you will have episodes in summer at more than 50 degrees. This is a real question, because when you live in Paris like I've been living my life, you know that 50 degrees is unbearable because it's impossible to live there. So I think the climate change issue in terms of the space that we're creating is something that we need to address. And maybe there are solutions that the Grand Paris Express are providing, but we are not already fully aware of those solutions, and we need to work on that to expand the capacities that a network like this and an infrastructure like this can bring to this question.
Thank you for that. I'd like to bring Carole and David into this conversation now. Thinking about linking networked infrastructures, how do you think emerging technologies like micromobility and rapidly changing transportation habits, like, for example, shifting to electric modes, offering mobility as a service, to name a few, how can these be leveraged to distribute flows from stations or rapid transit hubs to other lands and activities? In your opinion, how can these innovative forms of individual shared systems and technologies be linked with rapid transit?
Sure. Something I've really appreciated in this conversation and the introductory remarks about innovation is the relationship between innovation and experimentation. One challenge with building these large infrastructure projects that take many years to build and are intended to last for many years is that we like to build these we like to be able to imagine that we know what's going to happen in the future and how these things will be used, how they'll fit into the urban fabric, how the areas around them will develop. I have some students here in my travel forecasting class, and I told them that one thing I would say is that we don't actually know how to predict the future, and we're increasingly bad at that. Not because we've changed, but because the future is increasingly uncertain. And so I really appreciate this emphasis on experimentation, because the nature of experimentation, the idea of doing experiments, implies a humility. The fact that we call it an experiment because we don't know what's going to happen as a result. And I think, for these large infrastructure projects, you don't have the chance to, well, we'll try building a rail line here, and we'll try building one over here, and then see which one works out. The investment doesn't lend itself well to that. But this question of how can, I like the smaller wheels, how can these other networks integrate with the stations, that there is some opportunity for flexibility in our designs, creating the hard infrastructure that can't be moved around easily, to design it at least in a way where multiple kind of alternative future contexts could still work with what we're building, and then to think about pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure in ways that are flexible, to try experiments and collecting data and being nimble about being able to change course when things aren't working. That approach to planning, I think, is going to be increasingly important as we start to find out how will travel change when it's 50 degrees in the summer. We don't want to be completely reactive to that, but having this proactive experimental approach, I think, is going to be important.
Normandy. was
Go
saying
to Norm.
you have to go north to Normandy.
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough.
The sea rises, but
Yeah.
I'm just happy to hear the word innovation associated with rail as an American, to be honest, because I feel like my country has a very bad habit of taking this word innovation, sticking it on transportation, and ending up with just disasters. I think of the Las Vegas Loop, some of you might know. This just boondoggle of a project with led by the Boring Company, led by a very rich man with a four-letter word for a first name and another four-letter word for the last name. But it was tens of millions of dollars spent to build this tunnel in Las Vegas and to move people from one end of a convention center to another where you could literally walk it in 20 minutes. That tunnel has very fancy, bright lights and is one way with Teslas going through it. It was supposed to be autonomous pods. That didn't happen. And this is actually held up as like a model project by a lot of people who call themselves futurists in this country. So I just worry about what Americans do when we hear the word innovation, apply it to transportation. And when it's funny, I was talking to Yasha, who was on the panel just now. I talked with him yesterday. He's the head of the director of streets for Boston, and he was saying, like, God, you know, this project just blows his mind. He's like, I'm literally dealing, like 2 days ago, a chunk of the ceiling at the Harvard Square T station fell down. That's what he's dealing with. He's not dealing with the sorts of exciting, architectural vision projects that you guys have here in the Paris region. I think it's just to be very candid. I think that rather than focus on innovation when we think about rail in this country, like I think about my own personal experience that I live in Washington, D.C., and I had a meeting in suburban Maryland. This is a very dense part of the country between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. So I took commuter rail. We don't have regional rail. We have commuter rail in this country, most of the place. And I took Mark. Some of you might know Mark. To go up to the town where I had this meeting. I was like, oh, this should be pretty straightforward. Then I realized, okay, well, I have to choose very carefully because it's only one-way trips most of the day, so I could get stuck there for the entire rest of the day if I didn't choose very carefully when I was going. But it's okay. I figured that out. It's gonna be all right. And then it was only like I think a third of a mile between the station and where the office was, where I had a meeting. So I took Mark. It left on time. Doesn't always happen. It did. I got to the station. What do I see? Talk about connectivity and hubs. Huge parking lot, taking up all the best space all around the station. No housing, no shops, just a big parking lot. So it's all right. I navigated that. Now I'm like, all right, it's only a third of a mile now. Surely there's a pathway, at least a sidewalk to get there. No, I was walking along a highway with cars going by at 45 miles per hour on the shoulder of the road, a third of a mile. And I got there, took a deep breath, saw the woman running the company I was meeting with, and she's like, "Oh yeah, where did you park?" And I said, "No, I took the Mark." And her mouth just fell open. You're kidding me. I'm like, guys, this is a third of a mile from a regional rail station. So when we talk about connectivity and we talk about what innovation should mean in the context of the United States, I think we need to start with the basics. Like a phrase I use is mundane mobility, because when we start running with this word innovation, like I tremendously salute what you're building in Paris. We need to get some basics right first, in my view.
Thank you for that. I have one last question and then we'll open it up for the audience. Building on your question, I want to bring the conversation back to North America. In Paris, alongside the project, there's also a parallel movement focusing on city bicycle and pedestrian-friendly streets, especially post-COVID. Bringing it to North America, on one hand, how do you think urban planners, designers, and everyone else in the room needs to think about cities and public spaces that prioritizes pedestrians and cyclists? And on the other hand, what shifts need to be made to bring about a behavioral change amongst the population to accept newer modes of transportation, especially when the car is still the predominant mode of transportation here?
You have a scale problem, you know. To state the evidence, I really like that. I would think you should buy an electric scooter next time. but I do think there is a scale problem, evidently. You know, I'm not a great buff of the 15-minute city whatsoever, or, you know, density for the sake of density, but still, in the American sprawl, there is a density problem. And it's clear that not taking the car, as you said, it's quite a battle. So I do suspect that actually everywhere in the world mentalities are changing, but this is where urban design matters, because the inertia of form, urban form, it can be actually pretty hampering in many cases. So yeah, I think beginning to have pedestrian path and not having to walk along a rail on a freeway, etc., might be a good beginning. But also trying to think a bit more in terms of density, rethinking some aspect of transit-oriented mobility in the American version, etc., could be already a good starting point.
If I could, I would also add the word networks, thinking in terms of networks for sidewalks and bicycle lanes. Like most city DOT leaders who I know in this country do recognize that we need to do better at building pedestrian and cyclist infrastructure. But too often, what gets built is sort of either who's clamoring for it in a particular neighborhood, or what's the path of least resistance? Like, where can we put a strip of a bike lane or a wider sidewalk where the local residents won't complain? And so you end up with a hodgepodge. You end up with good infrastructure over for this strip, and then it gets bad for a bit, and then it's better again. And from the user experience, it's terrible. We think about the safety or comfort of an entire trip and the ease of getting the entire way you want to go. Not about oh, it's so great to be in a city where like this little area is comfortable and that area is comfortable, over here is bad, but that's okay because over here is comfortable. One model I really appreciate is actually from Italy with, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but bicipoletanas is what they call them, the bicycle networks, that if you see a map of them in cities like Florence or Rome, they actually look a lot like transit maps. And that's by design, to basically make it possible to have the trunk routes and the feeders to allow you to get on a bicycle or a scooter wherever it is you want to go. That's the right kind of thinking, in my view, and one that I think that you're starting to see American cities move toward more, but we have a long way to go.
Just a side note, because I wanted also to share my heroic story. In the Parisian part of my life, I live along a big boulevard. The most dangerous lane is the bike lane when you try to cross it. It's the Boulevard Sébastopol, and it's a freeway for bikes, and I'm terrified each time I have to cross it. Whereas, you know, crossing the automobile lane is actually pretty pleasant. So there is something to be said also about the need for civility, because one of the reasons it's so dangerous is that somebody on a bike doesn't seem the necessity to stop, whatever. So there is also new rules of civility to be learned.
I'm very afraid it's my way, and I'm the biker.
Yeah, I knew it.
It's him.
I knew it.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah, next time, you know, just think of the poor pedestrian.
GST can't afford to lose Antoine.
Yeah, please don't kill me. Don't kill me.
I'd like to echo David's comment about the importance of networks, and that a section of sidewalk or a section of bike lane is only useful if it is on the way between something and something else, and only if it's the entire trip that has that. One thing I would add, it's easy to think about, we had also the comment at Bus and the idea that bike lanes can be perceived as gentrifiers or as some sort of a luxury amenity. I think it's helpful to think about the idea that all travelers have a right to navigate the city and to safely navigate from any destination in the city to any other destination. And when we say all travelers, I think it's helpful to consider among those are people with disabilities who cannot operate a motor vehicle, who may use a mobility device like a wheelchair that requires a wider sidewalk. That would include children. who can't safely, cross busy lanes of traffic. That includes people who may work late at night and need to navigate urban areas. It can often feel safer to drive through a city at night than to walk, particularly for populations that have good reason to fear violence. And so designing networks where anyone can safely navigate the entire distance from an origin destination, and to treat all citizens as if, again, not as if a pleasant bike network is a luxury, but that allows citizens to fully participate in the life of their community. And not all citizens can operate a car. And our cities won't thrive if we demand that all citizens get everywhere in a car.
Thank you. We can take a couple of audience questions if there are any.
I have a question, actually, for Carole.
Can you use the mic, please?
I have a question for Carole. It seems to me that you're now describing network as being a lot more than just simply the road or the thing that he walked on uncomfortably and so on, right? Could you expand on that a little bit? In other words, when you're talking, walking at night, yes, I can assume we need to be brightly lit or lit in a certain sort of way, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more of a sort of a design question, in a sense, outside of just simply the route that this guy's careening along after Antoine. Right?
How I might describe it is that, the network is the links that connect one location to another, but those links only exist for a given user. If that user is willing and able to use them. So when I talk about at night, the network that might exist to me is a much more sparse network. There are links that exist for me during the daytime that I don't feel safe navigating those links of the network at night. And so routes that are available to me during the daytime may not be available to me at night. Routes that are available to me as an adult are not available to a young child who I don't trust to cross busy streets. Routes that are available to me as an able-bodied pedestrian are not available to someone in a wheelchair. So there is one network, the road that exists, but I visualize the transportation network as deleting links that are inaccessible to certain users, and so not everyone has access to the same network.
I was sort of asking, how do you amplify the links? In more or less the way that Pierre-Alain was talking about, right? I mean,
I'm wondering if network, then we don't have to change vocabulary, because in some ways it's more routes, and which adapt. I think one of the questions today is to get out of the fixed vision of the network as something rigid, but to go something which is actually a series of resources, which is, I think, one of the intellectual challenges also. But you're indestructible, Peter, we know that.
Should have seen the other guy. No, because they simply invite speed. And, if you're on a racing bike and you're doing, 30 clicks per hour, you can really do serious damage.
The worst are, in Paris today, electric scooters. There are a number of accidents. Yeah, un demi-deux, MV2.
I just find it interesting that you think an electric scooter is so much more dangerous than a car. Just going to put that out there. I feel like a car weighs how many orders of magnitude more than a scooter? I just think that it may be inconvenient to be encountering bikes and scooters on a street, but let's be realistic, at least in this country, scooters and bikes aren't going to kill you if you run into them. A car will and does many thousands of times a year.
Whereas in Paris, a car usually is slower than an electric scooter, which is the big difference in central Paris.
Still rather get hit by a scooter, personally. I'll let you have the car.
Yeah, that's an experiment idea.
Speaking of experimentation.
Absolutely.
I do have a quick question, maybe not quick, but to sort of return to Antoine's comment about the problem of scale that we have. And sort of, there's a problem of scale, and then there's a problem of governance in trying to do what Grand Paris Express is here. But the issue of scale, I think, is a real one. And I guess that this puts you on the spot, asked Pierre-Alain, because you're the only representative from the Grand Paris Express on this panel, but yeah, the heat is on. So how do you, what do you recommend for us? Or maybe Jean-François, you can jump in, but it is sort of, how do we deal with this question of scale in our country when it comes to transit?
Good luck, Pierre-Alain.
Well, that's a huge question, Sarah.
Before you speak, I just want to warn you. Before coming here, we did a huge training camp to manage to keep as modest as possible, as long as possible. Because, French people...
Which is not easy.
French people are used to be very quickly arrogant. And now I hear Harvard University who ask me what to do. So I hope it won't be too long, because we are going to dive into our very bad resolutions.
That was a very good point.
So you're telling me not to answer Sarah's question? Thank you, Jean-François. I'm sorry, I can't.
Your problem.
I think that means we have a break.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can continue some of these conversations in the break. Please join us again at 3 p.m. for the second part of the workshop, which is conceiving the metro station as a design object. Thank you everyone for being here.